All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on episode 112 of Blowback, Exposing Imperial Decline. We have our regular co-hosts, Ian Kummer from Moscow, Ben Toth from Page Hungary. Special guest today is Max Parry from Baltimore. I'm Billy Bob on the left coast, and we have a lot to get into. We're going to start out by discussing Zelensky's recent visit to the United States and his whirlwind television tour, trying to get weapons, money, continue the conflict, get permission from the West.
And
So,
a pink little pony. I've been away for the longest. Can I sort of lead this story up? Because it was amazing to
please.
me. It made me think of the TV. That's why we got the title, the TV tour original, which was December, I think, late 2022. Remember when he brought that flag signed by the people in the trenches in then Bakhmut, now Artyomovsk. He went to Congress. Nancy Pelosi almost kissed him or something like that. Big standing applause. And you know how the times have changed. He live streamed from some sort of cargo plane, maybe US, saying he's coming there. He's going to share the plan. Right, that's his new tour with Biden, with Kamala, and with Trump. And at his first fucking stop, which was Scranton, Pennsylvania, Biden hometown, right, the missile factory or something, where he signed the missile, he managed to insult Trump's VP pick. Like he's this radical something, talking about JD Vance, you know. That was his first step in America. So I'm just looking forward to the news cycle. By the way, sorry I've been away. I haven't really caught up with the news today. I've seen what was going on yesterday, and it looks like today there's also a big a YouTube censorship wave going on. It hit DD Geopolitics and Mark Sloboda, Realpolitik channel, too, which I really
Is
liked.
that within the last 24 hours or 48 hours?
Last 44 hours for sure. Yeah, 48
yes,
for sure.
Because
Yes.
I did not check my Telegram today, so I know RT got scrubbed from Meta platforms, so they expanded the censorship to other people besides RT. Is that what happens? Is that
it looks like any voice that has like an alternative on Ukraine is getting currently shafted. It really looks like it. They're really tightening the grip on this is the official story. Don't you dare say something else. By the way, I just want to end this story because I think it's related to last Friday, and I saw Scott Ritter, maybe on Jesna Politone or something, and I have no reason to doubt that we came close to nuclear annihilation when, you know, the Brits wanted Joe Biden to sign, here's the targets on the map. You should sign that we can use the Storm Shadow rockets using US intel to strike those. And that would have resulted in like an immediate response from Russia, which got canceled by the last minute. Like some Pentagon voices saying, no, we're not going to do it. Biden was visibly angry and the Brits were dumbfounded. I think they were convinced we can do this. Of course we can do this. There are no such things as red lines. And suddenly the red line was taken seriously. Right? Reminded me of there was this PM, also an Earl of something, like an aristocrat, who said it's the typical British mentality. You know, I think we are the Greeks to their Rome. They're talking about Americans, saying they're the big brutes, you know, they have the muscle, but we're sort of the philosophers. We're the brains to their brawn. That's still how they think of this, that we can get them to do shit. You know, both conflicts look like that to me. We're going to get the United States to do shit for us. That was my takeaway from this. I wonder how it's going to go. There's 2 or 3 days left of the Zelensky tour. He's going to the UN in New York. I know that. And then he's talking to whoever the fuck is in charge in the US. Joe Biden.
The General Assembly convenes on the 28th, or is it a multi-day thing?
I'm not sure, but I know he's going to address it. Yeah.
Yeah, I heard they were there was a lot going on. He was going to be there in New York on the 28th for a big thing. Max, what's your take on the whole that specific thing with Zelensky thinking that he's going to get permission to launch these missiles? Scott Ritter saying we narrowly avoided a nuclear winter. Is he embellishing a little? Is a bit of hyperbole maybe?
Yes, I was just going to say that. I mean, we have to remember. I mean, I love Scott Ritter. I've been a fan of his since the Iraq War days. But I do think that a lot of these geopolitical analysts Well, I think that there's probably some kernels of truth in what he's saying. I mean, even Seymour Hersh does this. I mean, they are reliant upon maintaining an audience and having like the big scoop, about every political development that comes out. And I feel like a lot of them, for the sake of landing like the big, I mean, they start to become, I don't know, it's like a brand. And I think that like he's probably exaggerating. Maybe he is telling the truth in this instance. I don't know. I mean, I put nothing past the U.S., but the idea that we were like at this Cuban Missile Crisis level, brink, I just find I don't know. I'm not an expert, so but all I do know is that a lot of these YouTube channels that specialize in geopolitical analysis and always like delivering like the behind the scenes, people who have past ties to the military, who have always have anonymous sources. I mean, Seymour Hersh always does this. I mean, you just have to kind of take his word for it because he has actually broken big scoops in the past. You have to assume that he's doing the same thing now. I don't know, but that's just sort of my gut instinct. I mean, I'm sure there probably is truth to it. I mean,
depending on where you want to go, like a next topic or a next stop, can I just insert something here? Because there's a lot of circumstantial evidence. It comes straight from Putin and then Peskov, and then the ambassador to the UN, Benzia, and then the ambassador to the US, Antonov, also said, "Come on, guys, you're messing with fire. This could be a terrible thing." And that's where Scott Ritter was on Friday the 13th, as Keir Starmer and Lammy, or whoever the foreign secretary is, arrived here ready to sign this crap. And he saw the ambassador like completely worried, sweat drops like bullets, and he shouldn't have been. It should have been just a concert of a Russian concert. So there's a lot of evidence to prove this point in particular. In general, I think you're quite right about a lot of geopolitical channels wanting to sort of land the big fish story. I think you're right. But in this case, I just wanted to say, I think this was a dangerous moment. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I trust Scott Ritter more than most of them. I just know, like, he's not around anymore, but like the Saker used to be the big one that would always have, like some big story about how we're on the brink of World War III. Like I remember like during the Soleimani assassination and stuff. So I'm just cynical. But
sure.
Chris,
I think a lot of this tour has to do really with the lead up, to the election. And as I was saying before we started broadcasting or recording, there's this big wave of ads this ad blitz that's been put out by the Harris campaign in states like Pennsylvania, targeting Polish and Ukrainian expat populations in those states, these enclaves, that are just, these ads are straight out of that make the Democratic Party look like right-wing loons from the Cold War. I mean, they're talking about Kamala standing up to communist dictators with images of Stalin.
I really want to see these, by the way.
Yeah, I'll post a link, or I'll send you guys a link. The Gray Zone did a little segment about it, but they're just insane. It's paid for actually by a Ukraine related PAC or super PAC. So yeah, they're really and the fact that Zelensky's here, doing this tour, they're really and apparently there's yet another wave of censorship online related to developments in Ukraine. I mean, they're really ramping this stuff up. And of course, obviously there's some degree possibly of Ukraine involvement in that second assassination attempt with this Oswald like patsy, this MSNBC CNN brain-addled, lunatic who apparently, was going to take a shot at Trump while he was on the golf course. So
yeah, the second guy.
Yeah. So I think that they're really ramping up the hysteria around Ukraine. And I last night I was watching the Midwestern Marks channel, and CNN has been doing this regular segment on Anderson Cooper's show with this anchor, Donnie O'Sullivan, who a few years ago was the guy that put out a few reports on this website, American Herald Tribune, where myself and a few other analysts, Danny Haifong and other people used to write for. And he got that site seized by the DOJ and the FBI as an Iranian influence site. But on Sunday, anyway, for this Anderson Cooper show, he did this big hit piece on Jackson Hinkle and Russian propaganda online, really fear-mongering about that stuff. And he actually interviews Hinkle in it. And shockingly, he also interviews one of the editors, the post-Alexander Coburn editors of Counterpunch newsletter, this guy Joshua Frank, who is an absolute tool bag. And, is one of the editors of Counterpunch who purged many of their old writers who've been there for a long time. I mean, I only know them a couple times, but everybody from Paul Craig.
Counterpunch was might be confusing to someone else, but they were a big kind of left-leaning anti-war outlet, like in the early 2000s.
And
right?
under Coburn, it was famous for having a wide variety of. They had everybody from Paul Craig Roberts, Ron Unz used to write there, Israel Shamir, Pepe Escobar. The list goes on to very, liberal, Jesse Jackson, Ralph Nader. It was a great magazine because it had the whole spectrum covered.
Kind of like RT. Yeah.
Yeah. And then once Coburn died, Jeffrey St. Clair and his little protege, Joshua Frank and Eric Dreitzer, all these people, they just started purging people. And then there was this big scandal where they had accepted articles from an anonymous writer that went under the pseudonym Alice Donovan, who turned out apparently to be, the FBI said it was like a Russian bot or whatever. And then so after this was during the 2016 election. And so really after that story, they really started just getting rid of anybody that what St. Clair called the Sputnik left. Diana
it's sanitized, basically.
Yeah, and they just made it, it's basically just an echo chamber of liberal left and, some radical left people. But there's a few okay people who still write there. But it's mostly just exactly what you'd expect. It's not the vision that Coburn had at all. I mean, Coburn used to attend rallies with people from antiwar.com, the libertarian site. They haven't fulfilled his vision at all. But now this is a new low even for them. For one of the editors to collaborate with CNN to attack people on, the anti-imperialist left about Russian propaganda all online, whatever anyone wants to say about Hinkle, I don't care, whatever. But to do that while the Uhuru 3 are being tried, in Florida, these African people socialists, I mean, it's just disgusting. So this guy, Joshua Frank, I mean, yeah, I was really shocked. I mean, I expect a CNN hit piece on Hinkle. And I know there's a lot of people that don't like Hinkle for various reasons. I don't agree with everything he says. But to collaborate with CNN for, Counterpunch itself was listed on, what was that?
The proper not.
So they're actually, this is Fed level shit.
Yeah.
To collaborate with CNN going after people. And I was just disgusted, but it was. And
we're not supposed to. This isn't the main topic, but it's the ACP. It's the American Communist Party. From day one, Google sent people basically back to the classic Communist Party under that idiot. It doesn't matter, but they want to silence it. Wasn't this the CNN hit piece that they interviewed Haz al-Din as well? Okay, because he ran a bit of a victory lap yesterday when I surfaced on social media. I saw that, but interesting.
Yeah, he talked about it too. Midwestern Marx was actually showing clips from Haz's channel. Actually, it's hilarious. I wanted to go watch the full unedited thing myself, but CNN is doing so poorly they make people pay to watch their segments online, so I couldn't even see the whole unedited thing. They're
Yeah,
so
Cla-
I heard
Legacy
about
media
it
is
and
dead.
I found it on YouTube. Donnie was interviewing Hinkle. So I didn't see all of it. It was probably a longer piece, but I saw the actual interview.
Yeah. They I saw that link too. It didn't have the segment with Joshua Frank. I mean,
Right.
CNN is really. I mean, they're so in the tank ratings wise that they're having to have people pay for. I mean, and plus CNN Plus was a disaster. They're just irrelevant at this point.
That's why I think this purge in YouTube and social media is a panicked response. They want that control of the narrative that I don't think they have any longer. But if you guys want to get back to Zelensky tour, I really want to know what you guys think he thinks he can get out of this. Please save me.
Well, so I've got
well-
opinions, but I want to hear Ian, and then I have like a basic
Me too, by the way. Yeah.
summary. So Ian, wherever you want to go with this.
Well, so I had a couple thoughts on that. So one, as far as because I did not watch that piece that Max referenced and Ben referenced about what Scott Ritter said. I think in general, what Max said is true. There is, unfortunately, not to say any of these people are necessarily wrong, but there is a tendency to clout chase to get, say the most sensational thing possible. And there is nothing more sensational than saying we're on the brink of nuclear war. So I do think that was, so I think we're close, but there is some back channel dialogue going back and forth between the USA and Russia, because we know it's openly admitted that there was and still is back channel dialogue. And there's a hotline in Syria to avoid a direct confrontation that could escalate into World War III. So I'm sure there's one, even though they don't admit it, because it goes against the good versus evil narrative that they want. Because admitting that the USA regularly talks, even if it's not Austin or Biden who's doing the talking, it's somebody in the Pentagon who's doing the talking with the counterpart.
I think they talk too.
Yeah, I'm sure. Absolutely sure. They can't admit it because that would ruin the whole good versus evil narrative. Like Biden's big tough guy. I mean, it's funny how Biden is painted as like basically a modern day Reagan. They really paint. It's just so hilarious to me that the Democrats have their own Reagan, who's also apparently has cognitive decline like Reagan did. So
he's more.
They didn't wake Reagan up during the invasion of Grenada, supposedly.
Yeah. So it's just. I have nothing to say to Putin, but somebody in your administration does, whether or not Biden is willing to admit it. But that said, I do think there is the danger is in the fact that, so in the Cold War, and we see this from the declassified documents from the Cuban Missile Crisis, the military was traditionally the ones who were the most hawkish, right? They wanted to fight, and it was the civilian leadership that had the lead.
Now it looks like it's the other way around,
reverse,
doesn't it?
right? Because the military wanted to use nukes as a tactical weapon in Korea. They wanted again to use tactical nukes as a weapon in Vietnam. They wanted to escalate the Cuban Missile Crisis. Is always the military, but now it's like you said, it's the reverse. I think it's the military, and the reason why is because the military leadership has practical and technical knowledge of what a war is, right? They war game this stuff. They know roughly what it would look like if a Russian or a Chinese division fought an American division, right? They war game this stuff. They have all this. Yeah. They spend a lot of money to war game this stuff, so they know roughly. They have a somewhat realistic viewpoint. But civilians, but their counterparts, and unfortunately, I hate to sound like a boomer, but. We have unfortunately, we have the stereotypical, soy latte type millennial. Well, those people are in their 40s now. We're in their late 30s and 40s now. The White House is full of them. So you have all these whiny people who just think, well, Russia hurts my feelings. We need to nuke them. And they have no practical or real world understanding of what these words they say mean. They're just, Putin hurts my feelings. We need to go to war. We need to go to war. And then you have the military guys just in the room trying to explain, well, no, we can't have a nuclear war just because your feelings were hurt. I literally think that's what these conversations are like. You just have to those hysterical and divorced from reality type people
Completely agree. I just want to add one
Yes.
name to it, because when you talk about the civilian administration, it's not the zombie. He's not in charge of anything. It was Blinken. See, Keir Starmer and Lammy, they were convinced, like they were going to get the green light. Everything's going to be okay. It's going to be signed. And I think they were convinced by Blinken saying, come on over. We're going to sign this and you can strike with storm shadows in whatever, Leningrad, Moscow. And then they got the big no from Biden, who was visibly agitated by this, which came from somewhere. Probably the military.
Yeah, and that generation, those senior civilian leadership are not maybe hysterical like the mid-level. So I think the mid-level people are insane and hysterical. And then you have the senior leadership who are just genuinely stupid. Blinken, I think, is just not very smart. He's a product of nepotism, right? He's just not the brightest bulb. He's slow. The guy's slow. He's not good. He's not a witty person. He's not quick on his feet. If someone surprises him with a question, you can see, like, if you watch the video, you see how angry he gets. Like in Afghanistan,
I know what you mean.
He was angry. It's the problem with being angry and being stupid. It's just not. It's a harsh role in life. And Austin is a military guy, so you'd think he'd be the smart, knowledgeable person in the room, but he's
Lord Raytheon. No, he's a black salesman.
The thing is that he's associated with a long string of failures. Unfortunately, as far as anyone can tell, he's either maybe to some extent he's a diversity hire, but I think he's just hired for his political loyalty, and doesn't matter if he's kind of slow, because the guy is slow. I mean, he disappeared from his office for 4 days or 5 days, go to the hospital.
Found in a hospital.
He should tell anybody. That might be important to tell someone. So we just have these very slow and stupid and emotional people in the civilian leadership who are pushing for this insane, crazy stuff. But unfortunately, I think, like, there was a revelation a couple days ago. I saw it in the news that Milley was kind of personally got involved in the whole January 6th thing. Like, he was like, we have to stop, like, what happened to not, like, he was getting personally involved.
What's his station now? Isn't he like the retired?
And I assume he's making a lot of money somewhere. But he was the chairman.
He was the original 4 days to Kiev guy. Just so you know, that didn't come from Russia. That came from this guy.
Yeah. So I saw it as a big sign that the military is. I know certain people on the show don't agree with that, but the military is very much getting into the Democrats' camp, because can you imagine a Bush era chief of staff, just getting involved into a partisan dispute like that? Because there were contentious elections before, right? Both 2000 and 2004 were very contentious elections. You didn't have the chief of staff jumping in and getting personally involved and talking like he was going to have to deploy troops to put down unrest like Milley was. I mean, it really shows. It shows the strategy. They want the military to be loyal to one party. And I think that's absolutely worked. They've picked people, they picked out people who are loyal and forced out those who couldn't be counted on.
Well, the only thing is that the establishment wing of the Republican Party doesn't like Trump either. So I don't know if it's quite, I don't think it's necessarily quite a Democrat-Republican thing as it is an establishment populist thing.
I think they'll take. I think those senior Republicans who are anti-Trump and anti-populist, I think they chose their class loyalties over their party loyalties. They would prefer to lose elections and be a permanent minority party than to be on Trump's side. I think that's.
Well, I do.
That's the other thing.
The Trump domestic legislation stuff, as far as like I remember when Trump was appointing all those Supreme Court judges. I mean, W intervened to put in his 2 cents about that. I mean, that was something that was supported by. I mean, Trump appeases the establishment wing of the Republican Party with these domestic policy moves and things like that. So
he did.
Who knows what he will do next? Complex dynamic.
That's
Well,
the other thing I saw yesterday. I resurfaced for a couple of hours to browse news, and there was a lot of brand new, like mainstream Bloomberg, Washington Post stuff about Trump proofing the Ukraine aid, which was also related to this Zelensky thing. Like not months back, but today. Like preparing this support for the eventual next president for some reason, even though they have their heroine Kamala, the joy candidate who they really think is going to be president, was interesting to me. So a lot of this could be Trump proofing, but down to the nitty gritty of what he wants: for full NATO membership, Article 5, send everything and let us strike everything in Russia.
Okay.
Is that and a pink little pony?
I have been very patient.
Sorry,
I have waited. But I'm going to forget. I'm going to forget everything I wanted to say.
Go ahead.
If I don't interrupt. So Scott Ritter, I think he is, he's motivated out of a good place where he really thinks that the American people need to be frightened and wake up, right? So I think he's motivated to maybe allow himself a little bit of hyperbole. And he doesn't, he has this insight. He has this knowledge that most people don't. Like he knows, the doctrines, he knows the thought process, and he understands in a way that most people don't, just how dangerous it is. But at the same time, I think he's willing to allow himself to be a little hyperbolic, because it's for a good cause of waking people up. So I don't think he's, chasing clout, right? I think he's motivated out of a place of trying to just wake people the fuck up. And for people like us, we see that it is some hyperbole there. But
it's out of genuine concern.
Yeah,
I agree. Yeah.
I don't disparage Scott for doing that. There's two major ways to look at this Zelensky thing. Moon of Alabama had a real great explanation, which I find very compelling. And then there's an alternative to that one. But Moon of Alabama essentially was saying that he's coming here knowing his demands are going to be too over the top and they're going to be rejected, right?
I heard that one.
And then once that's rejected, then he's going to have to start dealing with Russia with the real peace process. But he can at least then tell the Ukrainians that it's because the West doesn't want to win. It's the West's fault. They're not supporting us anymore. I told them what they need to win.
They abandoned us.
Yes. And now that we're abandoned, we have no choice but to end this war and talk to Russia and figure something out. And so he's kind of threatening the U.S. This is what I'm going to do if the
It's
U.S.
blackmail, isn't it?
Yeah, to all these things. And so the alternative perspective, right? So that's one way of viewing things. The other way is, that this is how the escalation is going to happen, right? And the U.S. is going to first say no to these long range strikes, and then they're going to say yes. And this is the way in which we're going to get on a bigger war footing with Russia, a direct confrontation with Russia, perhaps between NATO and Russia, which the U.S. has always said we don't want, right? We don't want that. Well, they also said they don't want to give the F-16s. They said they don't want to give the M1A1s. They said they didn't want to give the Javelins. And so I don't know. It's an open question in my mind. The strategy that the U.S. is going to pursue. I'm not sure the U.S. knows right now what strategy they're going to embrace.
I think the problem with Moon of Alabama is him specifically, and I've actually had some conflicts with him in his comment. He actually blocked me at one point because he was being this was a couple of years ago and things were going very bad. This was in the Kharkov offensive, and he was being hysterical, saying Russia needs to do mass bombings, blah blah blah. He's being very hysterical. I said this isn't helpful. And he blocked me for that. So I think the issue with Moon of Alabama is that, and this is actually a lot of commentators on both sides, is this kind of, it's a logical fallacy. I forget the exact name of this logical fallacy. Unfortunately, it's basically assigning motive when you can't know the motive. So all you know is, like, if I see you pick up a hammer, I can say, well, Billy Bob picked up a hammer. If any, just guessing, oh, well, Billy Bob picked up a hammer because he feels blah, 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 blah. That's guessing. I don't know why. All you can do is observe that he did a thing. You cannot assign a motive, or at least say, I'm guessing because he wants to do this or do that. You can't. So as far as Zelensky, I see no evidence that it's not a genuine request. When Zelensky comes and says, I want this, I want that. I don't think there's any reason to say it's not a genuine request. He thinks he's trying his best to get things approved.
Bernard there at Moon of Alabama would suggest that Zelensky is pretty certain his demands are going to get not approved. And it's, this is, and eventually it's going to lead to, Zelensky saying, hey,
I want to show you guys.
It's bad motive. It's bad motive. Essentially, what it is bad motive fallacy. And I see this from commentators on both sides of the war. They say, well, the people I don't agree with don't have genuine convictions. When the reality is most people do genuinely believe something. I genuinely support Russia, or I genuinely support Ukraine, or I genuinely support NATO. People do have genuine beliefs. They're not.
I want to show you guys something, because this was 3 days ago in the Washington Post. Democracy Dies in Darkness. It was a sit-down interview with Zelensky before he arrived here, and he already said he's going to appeal to. You can read it. It's mostly the opinion guy, and in the end, you can get actual bits and pieces from Zelensky. He's going to appeal to Biden of his sense of legacy. How do you want to be remembered? Will you be the guy who supported Ukraine to the end, or the one who left us in a lurch and betrayed us? Basically, this is the blackmail theorem that Billy Bob talked about in The Moon of Alabama, straight from the horse's mouth. So it's like either way he goes, like hedging his bets. It's kind of, this is my plan.
Before we get too far into that, let me just, Christy corrected me because I didn't know when the UN General Assembly was meeting. And I guess they started on the 10th and they end today on the 24th. But today is a big thing going on. A high-level general debate will be today. So high-level general debate is today.
And Biden and Netanyahu, I mean, isn't Netanyahu there?
I don't know.
Good question. If he is, he's not worried at all about getting arrested.
Yeah, and apparently, Biden and he are not even speaking, even though they're in the same building.
I mean, that's interesting.
We'll get to that.
And we're gonna definitely try and hit on the Middle East. Hopefully nobody has to leave soon, because we're two more topics to get into. But the 28th, I mentioned the 28th, and Christy was right that's going to be the
Bibi may have pulled out.
Okay. So Bibi is not in New York, and the 28th will be the anti-war protest with Scott Ritter and many other people. Okay, that's all I had to say immediately. Do we want to continue discussing, analyzing the Zelensky-Ukraine issue? Do we want to move to the Middle East and Netanyahu now?
It's your soapbox, but this whole thing, just 2 years ago, that whole thing was support us in Bakhmut or else. This is the historic moment. And now it's the historic moment, but it's urgent. I saw 2 op-eds a day ago. One by Bojo, who ruined the Ukraine peace, Boris Johnson, the former British MP. The second one is a less-known British historian, pro-Ukraine hawk. Oh, shit, I forgot his name. Something sharp. And both of them said, you have to support Ukraine now. It's very, very urgent. So one camp that is completely, you have to give everything. The US needs to intervene. You need to be in NATO. NATO needs to take on Russia, is Britain. Zelensky is, I guess, has their support, but the US seems reluctant. That's how I see the equation. That's kind of the last point I wanted to add on to this.
Yeah, the US. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I actually meant to mention that, but I got sidetracked and forgot the way you described the British-American relationship. I think that's how the British see it. They see it in themselves as with your muscle and my brains, the world will be ours.
Harold Macmillan, yeah.
Yes. And that's code. I think there's a relationship of codependency that really started in World War I, because in World War I it was the largest up to that point, up to 1915, it was the largest loan in human history, $500 million to France and Britain. And there's this saying that
$500 million. Sorry.
Yes. And there's this saying, I forget exactly how the saying goes, but it's like, if I owe you $10, that's a problem for me. If I owe you $1 million, that's your problem, right? that's kind of the situation with the U.S. because the British intelligence was constantly fishing for a way to provoke the USA to enter the war.
Get them in, exactly.
Yes, but on the other side too, I mean, that was a problem actually for the USA because $500 million was would have been a disaster if France and Britain folded in the war and just said, "I'm sorry, but we can't pay. We lost to Germany." That would have been a seriously bad thing for the USA. So we kind of I think that loan was probably the single biggest thing that got us sucked into the war. So I'd say now you have this codependency. You have the USA as the world's creditor, essentially, and with the world's reserve currency. And then you have Britain kind of playing, even though they don't have an empire anymore, it's just basically an island. And, you know, they really, even though they don't have an empire anymore, they still fantasize as the brains of the operation and kind of trying to use the USA as the brawn. I think that's pretty accurate. I just want to, I'll finish this up. I promise I'll finish this up. But I'd say the way Zelensky came to the USA and, you know, he's been extremely insulting every time he came. Like I still love Tucker Carlson's piece when he said, you know, in his stereotype, you know, that voice Tucker Carlson always has when he's mad. He's like, you know, Zelensky came here and he's the first person in American history to appear to Congress in his pajamas, looking like the manager of a strip club. Like it was, I mean, he's absolutely right. Zelensky always is extremely disrespectful. But I think it kind of plays into the general attitude, you know, that, you know, we're not individual, you know, countries and nations. It's just this kind of global blob, right? So Zelensky, I don't think he actually is a member of the global blob. I think he's on the periphery. He's like a hopeful member. He's not.
He wants
really,
to be in. Yeah.
Yes, he's not a cool kid. You see how the way they ignore him at those meetings. Like he's just this weird. He's like the weird kid.
The famous
at the prom.
Gardner photo from the Vilnius NATO summit, where he was.
He's like that weird. He's like that weird kid who showed up to the prom. No dates. Nobody wants to talk to him. He's just kind of standing off in the corner by himself. That was Zelensky. So he wants to be in, but he talks like one. And he's an actor. He's a showman. He knows how to talk.
He knows the camera. That's the other point. Yeah.
So he's a great pianist. He's really good on the piano.
Yes. He can play without hands. Yes. You know, so I think what he says really is representing what that global blob says. So they don't so when someone like J.D. Vance, because I think J.D. Vance, it's fair to describe J.D. Vance as a right-wing nationalist, right?
Yeah.
He's a nationalist. He's right wing. He's kind of xenophobic. I wouldn't call him racist necessarily. He's kind of xenophobic. Okay. And then you see that's just kind of repulsive to the international blob because it's like, what's this guy doing? He's just talking about like the United States, like it's a real country or something, that it has national interests. No, you're not supposed to talk about national interests. You're supposed to talk about the group's national interests.
Yeah. There's no one it scares more than some European blob members. They really hate that kind of
because just imagine Americans walking around like they think we should just think about American interests and not care about European interests. It's just they hate that. They absolutely hate that. Terrifies them. And so when I see that pure just rage, especially when these European liberal types talk about Trump and J.D. Vance and these stupid rural Republicans who don't want to spend trillions of dollars on Europe, you know, you just see the fear too.
Do you remember the exchange between the direct exchange between Stoltenberg and Trump when Trump was chastising him, saying, you're going to pay more? I mean, the look of disgust on Stoltenberg's face was like he wanted to leap across the table and strangle him.
On this very topic, the latest member in NATO, of course, is Sweden. And I just saw a small piece from Mette Frederiksen, I think the PM is called. And she said, the first thing we need to achieve peace is just let go of this discussion of red lines. Just forget the Russian red lines. They're the ones because they signed up, they're going to pay a fortune. They want to get the US into this war to handle it for them. That's what happens to you when you become a new NATO member. You know, Hungary still being the sober one around here.
So there's two thoughts about the United States approach towards Ukraine. And one says they want to hand it over to Western Europe and they want to pivot to China.
And they will.
The other is that, we want to get more involved and we want to escalate there.
Mark my words, they're going to dump it in Europe's lap. They're going to do it. Either one of them.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And I know this is a great debate on this show, you know, because I am not a believer in the pivot. I think I've said that before. I think, and that's I think that's one of those we're just gonna have to wait to see who's right.
In the pivot, me neither. But as for abandoning Ukraine, I'm 100% convinced at this point. Either party, as in Kamala Biden,
consistent with their history.
Well, I mean, what I mean by that is that I think they'll drive. I mean, they're not going to. I don't think they're going to dump Ukraine while as far as the statement, they're going to dump Ukraine while Ukraine still has fight in it. No,
to the last drop.
Will. I think it's going to be literally to the. They'll. I mean, of course they'll abandon. I mean, they're not going to volunteer to rebuild Ukraine. Hell no. I mean, I don't think anyone here even believes it. Even the people saying it's going to happen don't believe it. But I think while Ukraine has a drop,
rebuild whatever is profitable. I mean, they will definitely rebuild what's profitable.
They will respond. They will rebuild the same amount they rebuilt in Afghanistan, which is nothing. So
when those BlackRock contracts become null and void, that's when they're going to say tentacles off. We're done with this.
They would have rebuilt the lithium mines in Afghanistan if they had political control. But the reason there's nothing profitable because they don't have political control. If they get political control of Ukraine, they'll build back the profitable things to extract wealth from there. And then the people will still just be employed.
Russia needs to allow
prosthetic limbs from a helicopter down to the Ukrainians, missing limbs.
Well, it's
like bad taste satire, but it's close to reality. Yeah.
But here's the thing: so Afghanistan is not a competitor to Western Europe, right? Afghanistan is more of an Africa's ballpark, right?
Yeah.
That you can basically scum resources off of them, raw resources off of them for pennies on the dollar. The problem with Ukraine is that all of their stuff, all the good things about Ukraine competes with Western Europe. I mean, look at how the Poles...
Soviet production, yeah.
Well,
that's not a new complaint. It's not a new complaint with the Poles. Like
breadbasket.
Whenever Ukrainian grain is allowed into the European markets, who gets upset? The European farmers. Because there's nothing.
Because we're under the net zero regime, of course.
The multinational corporations like BlackRock don't care about the Dutch farmers. They want to make money for themselves, and so if they can make more money off of exploiting Ukrainian
Dutch agricultural companies care about Ukraine muscling in on their profits.
Sure.
Well, I say that's kind of an old theme, right? Because the Soviet Union was dissolved on this promise of prosperity, that these Soviet republics and Warsaw Pact socialist republics were sold on this idea that, hey, you can all be like France. Like, look at France, which is this.
That's what they told us. Yep.
Yes. Yep. The only thing holding back Hungary and Poland or actual Soviet members like Ukraine, the only thing holding you guys back is those bad Russians. Those bad Russian imperialist commies. But then the Soviet Union was dissolved, the Warsaw Pact was dissolved, but they did not, the problem is that the world already has a France. No one needs a second France. France doesn't want a second France.
Right. I mean, they were lied to, of course. And especially the Russians themselves were lied to more than anyone because they never had any intention of doing anything except destroying Russia and, exploiting it to a maximum extent. But, are we going to talk Middle East? I wanted to contextualize.
Here's a quick way to do that segue, I think, because both of these little men, Bibi and Zelensky, it's like Mussolini threatening Europe with the armies of Hitler. They want to bring in the big bad USA on their side, and they're both desperate to do it. I think that's a unique connection these two conflicts share at this moment. They really want it, and they want it now because they can't handle it alone. Do you think that's something?
Ian did.
No, Max doesn't agree. I'm
I don't know. I mean, they're making the same. It's a good point. I mean, they're making the same promises or indicating that to both of them, and obviously, it's this is where their interests clash. I mean, the United States is using them as both as cat's paws. Obviously, it's the same thing in relation to Iran. Israel has been trying to drag the U.S. into a direct conflict with Iran, and to a certain extent, that would sort of start if the U.S. was to go into Lebanon and take on Hezbollah because Israel can't fight the battle itself. But obviously,
come save us. Yeah.
large swaths of the U.S. establishment that knows that that's a terrible idea to directly go in and have, troops on the ground assisting Israel in in an invasion of Lebanon. It would just so I don't know. I think that's why it makes sense to me that the U.S. I mean, typically it doesn't finish these conflicts that it starts, including the Iraq War and Afghanistan. It starts a conflict, prematurely declares victory, and then moves on to the next thing.
On an
So
aircraft carrier. Yeah.
shift to Asia, pivot to Asia with, trying to instigate a Taiwan, quagmire would be the next logical step, and shift the burden onto, Germany and Western European countries.
Ian brought up a very fun and contentious issue, because I recall in the past I have asked Ian if he agrees that the United States sees China, right, as the ultimate white whale that they have to destroy, right? Like China's the big prize that they really have to go after, and Russia was a stepping stone, right? And there was two choices towards Russia: get Russia on our side against China, or just destroy Russia. And obviously Trump was thinking we'll get Russia on our side, and then the rest of the establishment was thinking we're going to destroy Russia, we're going to balkanize Russia, we're going to overthrow Putin, we're going to make them a non-threat, and then we're going to go after China. But I want Ian to defend himself, because
the plan worked.
He rejected that, at least at the time. He said no, the U.S. isn't interested in seeing China attacked, or the U.S. isn't interested in attacking China or defeating China. They're interested in defeating Russia, and Russia is the major prize. But I don't want to put words in Ian's mouth. But I remember he rejected. So, and it just seems so obvious to me that China is the whole reason for our Russia policy. I mean, of course, if things were different, things would be different. But things are how they are, and they are the way they are because China needs to get got, and so that explains our approach towards Russia. But Ian, any thoughts on this?
Thank you, Anna.
Or we can move on.
Oh, by the way, this isn't a random stranger. Anna's my Russian teacher. She just logged on tonight.
Double thank you, Anna.
Yeah, so so don't say I don't bring new viewers to your channel. I do.
Thank you. No, awesome. Anna, great photo, Anna. You're looking really nice.
Yes.
Can I add a little bit to this from the junior imperialists in Europe? Because people think they're like client state. They're junior imperialists, who exploit Africa and other places. From their perspective, Russia was the prize. All those resources, without the Russians sitting on them, could be ours for free. That was the big selling point to the European, especially the UK. Who were salivating at the port of Sebastopol, absolutely. That's how it was sold to the Europeans. As for the US, I'll leave that to Ian.
Yeah. So I think what the comment I just showed and what Ben just said, I think that's true. Russia does have more resources. So China's not huge on, they're not exporter because they take those resources, they make things, but they need the resources just in, raw resources. And there's a couple other things too, I think. Yeah. Well, right. So, Russia is, I think a lot of the criticism towards Russia is, well, it sounds like, I make this joke a lot, when I read people who don't like Russia, it's like, you sound like you're talking about your ex-wife, it sounds like a bitter person, you're complaining about his ex-wife. Oh, my ex-wife is ugly. She's a liar. She's blah, blah, all these personal attacks. It just sounds like, I don't even believe those things you're saying about that person. It just sounds like you're really bitter and unhappy with that person. And so so when they say, well, Russia is weak, they're depopulating, they're not developed, blah, blah, blah. They say all this crap.
They don't have toilets. They're drinkers.
Yeah, right. It's just, it's bitterness. And I think it's also partially projection, because I think especially Western Europe is kind of aware that they're on the decline, and they are becoming very dependent on not just China. They're dependent on Chinese exports. That's true. But they're also
and the market in China. Oh, yes.
On the USA. They're just, they're not, driving their own car anymore, and they're pretty upset about it. And so they resent Russia that, Russia's not a perfect place
It's
by any stretch of the imagination, but it's sovereign. Yes. And so look at the countries they hate, these people who complain, who they hate the most. They hate Russia, they hate Iran, they hate China, but I think they hate Russia the most. And the reason why they hate Russia the most is, and I think the biggest reason is that it's closer and it's part of Europe, because like it or not, Russia is a European country. It's European geographically, it's European culturally, and ethnically it's European. It is. Whether
when this thing began, like over 2 years ago, I thought it was like a Cold War pangs, like still the red commies. And actually, this hatred predates communism. It predates the Soviet Union. It really does. It's been there forever in Western Europe.
Well, the interesting thing is when Napoleon attacked Russia, this same propaganda, there was propaganda that Russians would steal. I forget what they're called. What are they called?
Everything, your wives,
toilets.
Your resources.
Toilets. They would steal I forget. I'm drawing a total blank what they're called. The
bidets, the bidets.
The bidets is what you shit in, before toilets. They say, the Russians are steal because they don't have those. They don't have their own.
Bidet is a French ass washing thing. It's not. But anyway, they're going to. Anyways,
whatever the word is, but yeah. So he's inside. Yeah. So I think it goes beyond communism, and I think that's why you kind of see a split. It's kind of interesting. It's very apparent. I don't know how apparent it is in Europe, but it's very apparent in America, where a lot of the most right-wing anti-communist guys, the kind of guys who blame the Jews for everything, they invented communism to destroy the white man, those guys, those crazy, they're kind of kooky guys, but they tend to like Russia. And it's because those far right kind of wacky guys, they don't have a reason to dislike Russia, because when Russia stopped being communist, those guys had a reason to not dislike Russia anymore.
Yeah, it's no longer Judeo-Bolshevik, which was Nazi propaganda.
So
made it into this.
Yeah, so the stuff they moved on. Those guys moved on, but the people who didn't move on were the guys who already hated Russia even before communism, before Marx was even born. Just for centuries. Yeah,
that's what I was wrong about. Yeah.
It was amazing because I remember, because I was how old?
Do you remember Billy Bob's question? Because I don't. Like,
I was just going to say, I was 12 when in September 11th, and I was old enough to remember and especially with hindsight, because I can very clearly remember what happened that day and, the months and years afterwards. I remember how hysterical everybody was and how authoritarian everybody got, the Patriot Act, and just suppressing anybody who disagreed with the wars, even Iraq, which had nothing to do with 9/11. And I look at this stuff now, and it's like, this is worse. This is worse than anything I've ever seen.
And it's only getting started. I mean, I don't think we've even seen anything yet, really.
Well, yeah, Billy Bob, I'm sorry, I don't want to derail the conversation, but you had something you were going to say.
I just think, if we're talking about what is the motivating factor behind the Western Empire's approach to foreign policy and Russia and China, it's being driven by a certainty that China will displace them. Like, China's the biggest enemy. And I mean, Mearsheimer and Sachs, in their recent sit-down on-stage discussion where they disagreed about China,
the All-In podcast,
I was kind of embarrassed, right? Because Mearsheimer was rather dismissive of Russia. Like, he was like, I know Jeffrey agrees with me that Russia is really a minor power and not even, it's China. China is the one that is motivating the US's, this global drive to maintain their hegemony because of a rising China. And I felt bad. Like, I thought he was being too dismissive of Russia. Like, Russia is a serious global power, but economically speaking, manufacturing wise, they just are not the rival, and they're not threatening to displace the United States or the Western Empire economically, and they're not going to displace their global economic hegemony in the same way that China is doing. And for that reason, China is is what is the motivating factor that is making them, have this aggressive posture everywhere, right? Towards China, towards Russia, in Ukraine, and in the Middle East.
That's like a written
really,
policy, like stopping a peer competitor from,
there's clearly a dispute within the U.S. ruling class about what the greater priority is, and you have the Trump wing that is saying, that is really the more sober one, that's saying our chief political rival, in a sense, is China, and it's a bigger economic rival, and is projected, to surpass the United States by the end of this decade. And then you have, the Mackinder influenced Brzezinski wing that, that sees, that wants to conquer Russia's resources and get its hands on, on what's
land
under the
power
soil.
is a threat to our naval power. Yep,
exactly. And I think that, I remember even during Trump's tenure, there was a lot of people that were speculating that Henry Kissinger was actually the one that was influencing him to take that approach that sees China as the greater threat, and that that was one of the reasons why he was, at least when he was a candidate, obviously not once he was in office, but he was considering, that was his stated reason, dropping the sanctions that Obama had placed on Russia, was because it was pushing China and Russia together, which obviously their relations had Kissinger had been instrumental in the Sino-Soviet split in pitting the two against each other, and then China adopted the Soviet Union as a greater threat than the United States, and there was the whole theory of social imperialism, and then China started partnering with the United States in Cambodia, and they supported Pinochet and the Mujahideen, and even in Africa in the Angolan Civil War, they were on the side of UNITA. That Kissinger was the architect of that.
Greatest tragedy, by the way, finally being studied by Russian academics as well. It's been thoroughly studied by China, the Sino-Soviet split, but now the Russians
tragedy.
And now that's completely undone. That's completely undone.
It's off the table. It's the opposite has happened. If anything, they're closer together. And
so, that I think that there's a division between in the U.S. ruling class, and just because, whatever Mearsheimer said, I don't know, but no matter, obviously, one cannot dismiss Russia's return to the world stage under Putin. Obviously, that's one of the reasons why he's now Russia's primarily a target. But that doesn't mean that there aren't sections of the U.S. ruling class that recognize that China is clearly the bigger threat economically, even though it may lack the same level of rich resources and petroleum and all that as Russia. Economically, they are slated to surpass the United States, and that's the reality. So this is an issue of strategy, clearly, and there's divisions that have come about within the establishment as to how to approach this, and that's one of the things that's projected. Trump's rise to power.
True. By the way, Trump just wants to slap a 100% tariff on anybody who doesn't use the dollar. So that's plain and simple. But of course, this is campaign season, so who knows what.
But it seems that they really want Kamala Harris in power because they're looking at more wars and more kind of a hawkish foreign policy, and they saw that under Obama they could get away with that without people coming to the streets. So if there's a black woman doing it, you're gonna tamp down a lot of domestic dissent. Whereas if Trump was doing it, people would be up in arms and the Democrats would rally against him, and there would be a huge uproar. But when Kamala Harris does it, not so much. So I think that's one reason why we will see Kamala Harris. And I know
you think she's going to be president?
We
me
both
and
think.
are both pretty.
Oh, things have changed since I've been away because I don't imagine any way that she's actually going to get voted in.
Well, the way
maybe
is in the people.
I
That
did.
don't
We
vote.
didn't say she was going to be voted in. We just said she was going to be president.
Oh, I see the big, huge distinction. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, I just want to say that, in context of the China-Russia debate, what Max just said got me
I wanted to
thinking.
add to that too. Go ahead, Ian.
But, what you just said, Putin returning Russia to the world stage, and to an extent, that's true. But just as you said that, I got thinking, it's like, well, I think that
Kazan.
split what got Western powers angry with Russia actually, strangely enough, predates Putin.
They've had this plan all along.
Well,
I mean,
right,
that's
but what
the breakup of Yugoslavia was about too.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Yugoslavia and Serbia. What the march east to the airport during the Kosovo conflict in 1999. That was before Putin was even in office.
Yes.
Yeltsin, but the Russians went against because NATO was carving up. That was the intent. And Russia, and this is a very famous day, rushed to this airport that was strategically significant and secured it before the NATO forces.
Putin has deep regrets about Yugoslavia, as the same as Gaddafi in Libya. If he would have been in charge, he said things wouldn't have turned out this way. Yeah. In both cases.
Even Yeltsin had a problem with was expressing,
alcohol
reservations about the expansion of NATO, but unfortunately, he was too inebriated to really do anything about it.
I've seen clips of him just being drunk and in all of his public appearances. It's
falling down the stairs.
Yeah. Really embarrassing.
In order to come to power to begin with, he had already, made a deal with the devil with the 1996 election where, he hired these Western consulting firms.
The man who sold out the Soviet Union was Gorbachev. It was obviously Gorbachev,
right.
Not Yeltsin.
But I guess, my point was that even at its absolute weakest, Russia still, in a meaningful way, defied those globalist interests, and I think that was kind of the writing on the wall. And I'm sure that did not go unnoticed, because even when Russia and NATO were supposedly friends moving forward, if you look at those 1990s action
wanting
flicks,
to be friends,
Hollywood, you could see you could even see it from movies at the time. Hollywood pushing that narrative that Russia and the West are friends now. But,
Stargate,
Austin Powers.
Yes. But
I always remember that Stargate had a Russian team, and they were sort of uneasy but friends with the US teams.
That was really and it was Russia was Russia and the West were partners with Russia as the junior partner, of course.
Yeah.
But you can see in 1999, months before Yeltsin, even when Yeltsin's still in, you can kind of see they're like, oh, Russia is not just going to go lockstep with us. That you can see that might have been the moment when they said, if that thing with Serbia did not happen, if Russia didn't, or even just turning the play around, who I forget his name, their foreign minister was flying to the USA when they started bombing Belgrade. He turned the plane around. I'm sure a couple of the people in our audience remember his name.
Was that
Reddit,
period?
But he was actually in a plane flying to the USA. Then he got the news on the plane that the bombing had started, and they turned. Of course, Russia couldn't do anything to stop the bombing, but he turned around.
That was the thing.
plane.
Very opportunistic by the West. I mean, they knew that nobody would, stop them.
Primakov.
Thanks,
yes.
MK.
Whoops, not him.
So,
Primakov.
What's the summary of this issue? And I mean, I do want to talk about. There's any number of angles, but I want to talk about Israel, and because there's a big escalation, right? I mean, right now, as we speak, in the last 24 hours, almost maybe 500 Lebanese civilians have been murdered by. And so
doctors, lawyers.
I would summarize it. Summarize it as China is because it does boil down to race theory. China is seen as inferior And so when you see someone as inferior, you're not out to destroy. We're just subordinating them. So if you look at the Western strategy towards China, it's bullying tactics. It's not a war. It's not a. I would not characterize the strategy of surrounding China as a military tactic. I would summarize it as a bullying tactic. It's like schoolyards banter. You might not want to fight a guy. You'd be like, oh yeah, if I fought that guy, I might lose a tooth or something. I don't want to fight that guy. But what you might do is just bully him. You're just like, you're showing your superiority to him. So that's how I would summarize. I think this is, and I think also whether or not it's true, I think the perception of China is that they are very big on face. So the Western strategy is to make them lose face. So we're just going to make China lose face, show that we are the big dogs in the room, but we don't actually want to war with them.
Russia, you're engaging in ideas.
Well,
Ian. But what about? I mean, economically, we want to destroy them economically, right? Because
it's still not a military. It's still not a war.
Well,
can I?
Okay.
So,
all right, then I'm going to give you. Go ahead.
If everybody can have a go, I'll do a quick one. It's it was Russia was the dress rehearsal, and I think China owes a great deal right now to Russia because it laid to bear, it ripped away the veil of what NATO is, what the West and their financial system really is. But look, they're out to destroy us. They want our economy, basically the ruble burnt to rubble. They want us destroyed so they can have everything. And China saw, just recently in Global Times, the Communist Party of China, CCP's CPC, it's been a long time, main magazine, there was a big thing like NATO is basically evil and it's time for it to go. That's now their clear opinion, So China needed this 2 years.
Maybe I read that last night. That was a good op-ed.
Really good op-ed. I'm just saying that. Yeah, that is the plan for China. Maybe it's just bullying. You should still buy our shit while we don't buy anything from you, which I don't know how that makes sense to them. Because the other thing that was laid to bear during the Ukraine conflict, this is my last point, I promise, was there's also production issues. We can't do aircraft carriers every 2 years or something. We can't produce as many ships as China does. We can't produce as many missiles as Russia does alone. And that's collective NATO. And that's where the other China threat comes in. If they can produce anything in pretty much, an order of magnitude higher than we can, which is a threat. So I don't know. Did you see Sullivan basically admitting anything that Ukraine gets from now is going from production? We're out of stocks. We're not going to send Patriot interceptors to anybody else. We're going to send all of those orders to Ukraine because we are out. We don't have anything left. So at this point, to actually engage in another thing that they can't lose because of basic industrial non-competitiveness.
Who knows if they're out or if they just have reserves that they want to use on China. But the thing with China is that their economy is on a trajectory to displace Western imperialism, to displace us in Africa, to displace us in Asia, to displace us in Central and South America. And so we feel like we have to undercut them. We have to take them out at their knees. We have to cripple their economy. We have to contain them. And the way that we're going to do that by 2027 is we're going to interdict all their trade routes. I mean, that's why we have all these bases ringed around China. Now, I mean, you can call that bullying, but it'll end up in a standoff, in ships and cargo going to China being embargoed. We're going to initiate an embargo. And the thing is, how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to provoke Taiwan. We're going to provoke the Philippines and the South China Sea. And by 2027, we will be declaring an embargo against China. Like, I mean, if you watched Brian Berletic's most recent, maybe not his most recent, maybe the one two videos ago or one video ago, he really lays it out. He uses all the think tank literature, and then he just spells it out. I mean, the Marines themselves have been totally retooled to destroy ships, and armor is gone. Like, there's no real armor in the Marine Corps anymore. It's all about HIMARS and being put on these islands in these trade routes to disrupt the shipping. That they've been retooled, regeared specifically to interdict Chinese shipping. I mean,
enter Belt and Road, which has land corridors. Yeah. They're already too late to a lot of this.
The Malacca Strait. I mean, these are all the buzzwords that explains why a couple of years ago this Navy guy told his troops, we're going to be at war with China in the next 5 years. So it might happen before 2027 at the latest. But we're going to have to wait and see, because I can't, I can't prove it. But you can watch Brian's video, and it's overwhelmingly persuasive. I mean, and the question is, are they really going to do it? Because it seems obvious that it's going to be a losing strategy, and it's only going to increase the decline of the Western Empire. But
I need to interject just on a couple of points here. So one, as far as the Marines go, I mean, you really have to look into the internal politics at the Pentagon, because there has been a pissing match between the Army and the Marines that goes back 100 years or more. In World War I, Marines kind of stole a lot of the glory, and the Army were kind of upset about it. And that's a lot of the reason why Marines were mostly cut out of the European theater. Because, D-Day was the largest amphibious assault in history, but there weren't Marines there. Why weren't there Marines there? Well, because the Army was still kind of pissed off.
Because they had a lot of heroism in the Asia Pacific region against Japan. They really showed.
They did. They did. They absolutely. The Marines absolutely had their piece of the pie in World War II, but they were cut out of the D because the Army was like, no, that's our thing. And the Army was also the Army kind of got undercut in the Pacific theater, because the Army did participate a lot in the Pacific theater, but the Marines again took all of the glory. So what needs to be understood is that when it comes to that budget, that DoD budget, which service gets the most money, which gets the most funding for research and development, all this stuff, it's a pissing contest every time. And again, the most recent one was the Marines, and I say this as a former Marine, but the joke is that the Marines are an Army with a better public relations strategy. The Marines took all the credit for the early phase of the Afghanistan war, but the Army were actually the first ones there. The special forces from the Army were the first American troops in Afghanistan, but you wouldn't know that from the Marine PR campaign. So with this whole China-Russia thing, I looked at that new plan, that new restructuring of the Marines. And I saw that. I said the Marines lost that Pentagon war, because right now the money is in Eastern Europe. Because those very posh assignments in you want to be in Poland, because that's where the money is. Poland, the Baltic states, those really where you can just. The assignments are very posh. You can just go to Poland and hang out with the Polish girls and drink and talk about, what a cool American you are. That's where you want to be in Poland. Poland's cool. Okay. You can't tell me that the Philippines are better than Poland. I'm sorry.
If you watch the NCIS, there's a new version in Australia all about AUKUS. You don't hear about the Balkans or Bulgaria or Poland.
Because it's Australia. Yeah. Australia.
That's the Navy PR campaign that you mentioned. That is the Navy version. Yeah.
Yeah, Australia is the country that is surrounded by ocean, but bought tanks from the USA. That tells you all you need to know about Australia. But my main point is that the Marines got the leftovers. They got pushed out of Europe. They're stuck with the Pacific. And not all Marines like it. If you read Marine commentary, a lot of their officer corps is unhappy because they say, hey, this is a very passive mission. We're pretty much... There's no teeth to it. We're just kind of
but interesting to know about the Army-Navy rivalry aspect to this. Interesting.
Okay, and I'm just going to show this comment because this is the dumbest thing any human being has ever true. That's absolutely not true. I was a former Marine. It's nonsense. So please don't talk if you don't know what you're saying. But anyways, moving on. So that's the Pentagon words. But the main thing with Russia and China is that if you look at economic ability and resources and just all of the factors that make a country's power, Russia could survive alone, and they have survived alone without China. So if China was balkanized, Russia could survive. China could not survive on their own if Russia was balkanized. And the reason why is because if that Russian trades went away, I don't think
resources, energy. Yeah.
Yes, because imagine if all that if Russia was balkanized and all that, because yes, China is a net exporter. They're absolutely an economic powerhouse of the world.
Yes, but they're a
They
factory.
are.
Yeah.
But a factory needs coal for the furnaces. No coal, the furnaces turn off. You don't have a factory anymore. You have a paperweight. So that's the inherent issue with saying Russia is a stepping stone to China, or that Russia is a dress rehearsal for China. You can say they're equally important, but they ultimately at the end of the day, there's a hot war with Russia, but not a hot war with China. I mean, if a hot war with China starts, we can definitely reassess the situation. But as of right now, there's no hot war with China. I don't see evidence that there's going to be one in the near future.
But not a winnable one.
That's interesting.
Okay.
I mean, we have different perspectives of what's going on for sure. And, I think probably there's a lot of viewers, a lot of people in the world that agree with you. And then there's maybe one or two that agree with me, hopefully. But let's I mean, again, I can't prove that my understanding is correct. But I think if we see, we get to see it play out in 2026, 2027, I think at the latest 2027, we're going to be seeing, a real embargo, a real economic attack against China. Go ahead, Ben.
Billy Bob, whether right or wrong, the plan was absolutely to see Russia in economic ruin. Like, put the mother of all sanctions on them. Absolutely. People on the street, 1990s again. That was the plan.
I don't agree with Ian about the whole China thing. Just in terms of I do think that there's increased military presence even on the islands there right by Taiwan. I mean, it really seems to me like the U.S. is trying to instigate a theater or do something to provoke China in the same way they did.
They're setting the stage.
For China, especially while the U.S. is bogged down in these other theaters of conflict, if they're going to incorporate Taiwan into the mainland, I mean, now would be the ideal time. But that said, I want to hear. I'm from San Diego, California, so I come from a military town. So I want Ian to respond to Dust about the Marine, the Marines.
Either. Okay.
I'm interested to hear this.
So, guys, I mean, here's one thing. So, when you write one comment, it comes from everybody. So it looks like I sent the same thing as the blow. Anyway, but so the comments. So I'm kind of staying out of the comments. I'm not sure it'll be productive to engage with Dust when he can only type back.
Yes.
But, I don't care about Dust. I want to hear from Ian. The perspective, because he has personal experience in being a Marine. Because I've heard that from other people, so I would like to know.
Okay, so I don't want to derail the whole conversation, but I will just, since there's a request, I will quickly address that. So there was an incident with Stephen King, the author who writes books on coke. He had a scandal early in the Iraq War. He went in front of a group of school kids and said, if you don't do well in school, you'll sign up for the military and you'll be killed in Iraq. Basically, he said something like that. It's upset a lot of people. I understand why upset, but there's a stereotype that, only the poor people join the military. And it's not true. It's not true. Every branch actually, mostly, and you can look it up. The demographics of the military, surprise, mostly match up with the Democrats, with the demography of the USA. So you'll see roughly.
There's military families, going back to granddads. Yeah.
I mean, you'll see roughly the same racial background, roughly the same economic breakdown as you do in the general population.
So it's pretty proportionate.
Yeah, it's proportionate. It's not and the thing is that also it's not the 19th century anymore. You need technicians, you need professionals. So it's not just these people are too poor and stupid to do anything else. They join the military. It's not a true.
But what about the incentive that's always given? I mean, I'm just playing devil's advocate. What about the incentive that's given about
education and travel, and we've seen the ads.
Yeah, so it is used. So you'll meet. I mean, yeah, you'll meet Black and Hispanic, like people who are from lower caste backgrounds, and they're really into the military, and they're really like, and they're good soldiers and good Marines. They don't complain. They're just like, it's just for them, it's a step up in life. But you also see white middle class kids like myself who just were like, I don't know what the hell I want to do with my life, so they join the military. So you'll see a mix of all of that.
Well, I just think in terms of their recruitment strategy, it does seem like they, in public high schools, with JROTC, the targeting of minority communities does seem
adventure of your life.
Yeah.
And the thing about, so like Dust comments here, it's the infantry. Well, if you look at the infantry, there are two groups that are overrepresented: corn-fed white people and Native Americans. Those are they're actually overrepresented. Those are the two groups. And I've talked
Native
about
Americans. I mean, World War II. I know about code breaking, but what about today?
Native Americans. Well, one. So it's true that American reservations are basically ghettos. They suck. There's very little economic opportunity for people. And in fact, there was a friend of mine, it wasn't in the military, but it was in the Civil Air Patrol. I was volunteering in the Civil Air Patrol, and there was a Native American guy. I guess he was like in his 40s. He was just like, yeah, when I turned 18, basically, and he grew up on an Indian reservation. He's like, yeah, basically everybody just signed up for the military when we turned 18.
Wind talkers.
Well, wind talkers were famous because they were for a code, an unbreakable code in World War II. But
that's what I remembered. Yes,
the majority of Native Americans aren't, wind talkers or anything like that. They just join and get normal jobs in the military. So you'll find, and they're very patriotic too. It's very interesting to meet, Native American soldiers and Marines and sailors. It's an interesting group. But I'm sorry, I don't want to derail. I mean, it could be a thing I could do.
No, thank you. Thank you for indulging me. I just was curious because I've always heard the other perspective.
For me and for Max, this was interesting. So I'm thinking, Billy Bob, I don't know about you, but I'm bursting. So maybe we should get back to the Middle East like on Friday and start to wind down. You're the boss. It's your soap.
Oh, you're bursting? Well, I wanted to say one quick thing on the Middle East. But okay, I'll make it really quick. I mean, just the basic point, the axis of resistance is engaged in a war of attrition against Israel. And Israel wants to get out of this war of attrition because Israel can't last as long because, the people there have way more to lose. And so the people in Lebanon, the people in Gaza, like they can outlast, they can outsuffer, the Israeli citizens. So Israel is trying to get out of that war of attrition. And so they're escalating in order to force an actual hot war so that they can go back to normal. And the axis of resistance is intent on not letting things go back to normal. And so when you hear Biden say, we're going to escalate to de-escalate, we're going to have war for peace, it sounds counterintuitive and whatever that guy who wrote 1984-ish is,
Orwell.
The snitch.
Orwellian.
Yes.
But that's what they're saying. They're trying to break out of this war of attrition because the war of attrition is killing them. It'll destroy Israel. So they're trying to end that war of attrition, have a hot war, and so they can get back to normal. And
get the USA in as well.
Well, get the USA in to destroy their enemies, then to get back to normal. But
that's the plan,
anyway, I agree. We can pick it up. I don't mind getting the last word in as long as I can say what I want to say. That's all that matters to me.
Yeah, I mean, don't forget that Israel is 8 or 9 million people. It's smaller than Hungary, however high-tech and however armed it is. I mean, just in Yemen, the little Houthis in wearing sandals, they're about 30 million. So just don't forget the basic, demographics of the region. They can
suffer some attrition a hell of a lot longer than the New York City kids that live in squat in Tel Aviv.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and Ukrainian and Polish kids.
What's that?
Yeah.
The TikTok army. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Man, some of them are really,
The diaper army. Okay. That's all I wanted to say. And don't forget the Houthis, according to some definitions, are now hypersonic, right? So that's kind of a new wrinkle to this story.
And I could also hit. I mean, I didn't think people were going to be so genuinely interested. I could hit more on demographic groups in the U.S. military on Friday if there's an interest in it.
It's your area. I want to hear more about the U.S. military.
Yeah, so I don't want to drag the show on, but I could hit it. I could hit that.
I take you at your word, and I
Friday.
assume you're not deliberately giving us false data. But I mean, there is facts. Like, I mean, it should be easy to fact check to see what the demographic data is of the current,
Yeah, so
I'll say this.
We could go more at length than Friday. Yeah.
I mean, I've never heard, just growing up in a military town, I mean, the Army seemed to recruit and target, poor blacks and Hispanics and poor whites just as aggressively, if not more so, than the Marines. If anything, the Marines seem more like, like
selective
cult-like fraternity, that was reserved, I don't know. That I never had quite the perception that somehow the Marine Corps was like exploitative than the Army was, or that any less. So I don't know.
Stereotype. It's a stereotype.
Let's get the inside view next time, because I think most of our viewers not from the US, like me, they maybe watch JAG and NCIS, and that's pretty much all we know, which is a fantasy. It's Hollywood level fantasy. So it'd be good to get an inside perspective. Last thoughts? What do you guys think? Billy Bob, you're the...
Well, let's lock in Max for next week, Friday. Now, he probably can't do Fridays. Max, we appreciate you joining us. I wasn't sure we were going to have you as our special guest until right before, so it was great. Your contributions are excellent as always, and it helps the conversation go. So I was thinking, and then Ben was threatening not to join either. I was thinking it was just going to be me and Ian, and then we were going to look at maybe just canceling a second show in a row. Huh?
Threatening not to join. We'll talk offline.
Well, I didn't mean it like that.
I'm happy to do it. It's always good talking with you guys.
Yep.
So Friday, are you saying you're confirming for Friday with all of our 10 viewers?
Sure.
Okay, let's reconvene on Friday. Thanks, Max. Ben, Ian, yeah, we will talk offline. We will see you next Friday.